A woman found a sickly orange cat with sores near a garbage dump. What she did next surprised everyone. The late October wind, carrying the damp scent of decaying leaves and the promise of an early Pennsylvania frost, whistled down Elm Street, rattling the loose pane in Eleanor Vance's small apartment window. It was a sound she'd grown accustomed to, like the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall or the distant rumble of the evening train heading towards Pittsburgh. At 72, Eleanor's life in the small town of Maple Creek had settled into a predictable, quiet rhythm, punctuated more by the changing seasons than by any significant personal events. Her husband, Frank, had been gone for nearly a decade, claimed by a sudden heart attack that had left a silence in the apartment that the television or radio could never quite fill. Her daughter, Carol, lived 3 states away in sunny Florida, busy with her own family, her own life. They spoke weekly, the calls pleasant, but tinged with the melancholy of distance and diverging worlds. Eleanor filled her days with routine, tending her small balcony garden, now mostly put to bed for the winter, volunteering Tuesdays at the local library, walking familiar routes through the town, exchanging polite greetings with neighbors she'd known for years, but perhaps never truly knew. There was a loneliness that clung to her, not sharp or desperate, but a dull, persistent ache, like a phantom limb still sensing the warmth of companionship long gone. Maple Creek itself was a town caught between eras. The old brick storefronts downtown housed a mix of enduring family businesses, Miller's Grocery, Henderson's Hardware, and newer, struggling boutiques. Industry had largely moved on, leaving behind a sense of faded prosperity, and a generation, like Eleanor's, who remembered busier, brighter days. On the edge of town, past the abandoned textile mill, was the county transfer station, a place most residents avoided, its presence marked by a flock of perpetually circling gulls and the occasional stray dog nosing around the perimeter fence. It was near there, not at the station itself, but in the often littered alley behind Miller's Grocery where the dumpsters resided, that Eleanor's quiet Tuesday took an unexpected turn. She'd just finished her library shift and decided to take a slightly different route home, cutting behind the store to avoid the noisy knot of teenagers loitering near the main entrance. The air in the alley was thick with the smell of stale beer, rotting produce, and damp cardboard. Piles of discarded boxes leaned precariously against the brick wall, and plastic bags overflowed from the large green dumpsters. As she navigated past a particularly pungent pile, a sound, faint and utterly wretched, snagged her attention. It wasn't the usual scuffling of rodents or the cry of a gull. It was a low, guttural groan, a sound of pure misery that seemed to vibrate with pain. Eleanor stopped, her hand instinctively going to her chest. She scanned the clutter, discarded lettuce leaves, crumpled newspapers, a broken plastic chair. Nothing. Had she imagined it? The wind gusted again, swirling a cloud of dust and a stray plastic bag. Then she heard it again, weaker this time, almost a sigh. Her gaze fell upon a sodden cardboard box tucked between 2 overflowing garbage bags. Something shifted within it. Hesitantly, Eleanor edged closer, peering down. Inside, curled into the tightest possible ball, was a creature so pitiful it barely registered as alive. It was a cat, or what was left of one. Its fur, which might once have been a vibrant orange tabby, was matted into clumps with mud, grease, and something darker that looked horribly like dried blood. It was skeletal. Every rib, every vertebra of its spine stood out in sharp relief beneath the filthy coat. Open sores, raw and oozing, dotted its thin body. Its breathing was shallow, ragged, each inhale a visible struggle. Its eyes were crusted shut, sealed by discharge. A wave of nausea and profound sadness washed over Eleanor. This wasn't just a stray. This was an animal at the very edge of death, abandoned in the filthiest, most hopeless place imaginable. Its suffering was palpable, radiating from its frail body like a cold aura. Who could do this? Who could let a living creature decline to such a state and then discard it like trash? Her heart ached. She saw the faint tremor that ran through its body, the involuntary gasp for air. It didn't have much time. Left here, it would be dead by morning, perhaps even sooner. The cold, the pain, the starvation, it was a death sentence. For a moment, Eleanor hesitated. What could she possibly do? She was an old woman living on a fixed income. Vet bills could be astronomical, and this poor creature, it looked beyond saving. Perhaps the kindest thing would be no. She couldn't entertain the thought. She couldn't walk away, not from this. It felt like abandoning a drowning child. Without another thought, shrugging off the practicalities and the potential heartbreak, Eleanor slipped off her well-worn navy blue wool coat. It was her favorite, warm and comforting, but right now it served a higher purpose. Gently, murmuring soft, soothing words, "It's okay, little one, it's okay, I'm here." She reached into the box. The cat flinched weakly at her touch, but lacked the strength to struggle or even hiss. Its body was disturbingly light, colder than it should be. Carefully, mindful of the open sores, Eleanor scooped the trembling creature up and cradled it against the lining of her coat. It felt impossibly fragile, like a bundle of dry twigs wrapped in dirty rags. It let out another low groan, a sound that pierced Eleanor's heart. Clutching the cat tightly, holding the coat closed around it for warmth and security, she turned and hurried out of the alley, her steps much quicker than her usual pace. The teenagers were gone. The street seemed ordinary again. Shoppers bustling in and out of stores, cars driving by. No one seemed aware of the small, desperate drama unfolding within the folds of her coat. Her mind raced. The vet. She needed to get to Dr. Ramirez at the Maple Creek Veterinary Clinic on Washington Street. It wasn't far, maybe a 10-minute drive if traffic was light. Her old Buick sedan was parked just around the corner. The drive felt agonizingly long. Eleanor kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other protectively shielding the lump in her coat beside her on the passenger seat. She could feel the faint, rapid heartbeat against her palm, a fragile drumbeat against the silence. She spoke to the cat continuously, nonsense mostly, just a stream of gentle reassurance. "Hang on, little fella, just hang on. We're almost there. You're safe now. You're warm." She pulled into the clinic's small parking lot, her hands trembling slightly as she turned off the ignition. Taking a deep breath, she carefully gathered her precious, filthy burden and walked towards the entrance, the bell above the door chiming brightly as she pushed it open. The waiting room was empty, except for Martha, the cheerful receptionist, whose smile faltered slightly as she took in Eleanor's appearance, her missing coat, her strained expression, and the carefully bundled shape she carried. "Eleanor?" Is everything all right? Martha asked, concern etching her brow. Martha, I found this cat, Eleanor began, her voice thick with emotion. Behind Miller's, in a box. It's in terrible shape. Dr. Ramirez, is he in? Martha was already reaching for the intercom. Dr. Ramirez, can you come to the front? Eleanor Vance is here with an emergency. Dr. Ramirez, a kind man with gentle eyes and prematurely graying hair, appeared almost instantly from the back. He took one look at the bundle in Eleanor's arms, and his professional demeanor clicked in. Bring him right back, Eleanor. Exam room 2. Eleanor followed him numbly down the short hallway into a clean, sterile room dominated by a stainless steel examination table. Carefully now, Dr. Ramirez instructed, gesturing toward the table. With infinite care, Eleanor unwrapped her coat and laid the cat down on the cold surface. Under the bright fluorescent lights, its condition looked even more appalling. The matting was severe, the emaciation stark, the sores angry and red. The vet let out a low whistle. He pulled on a pair of disposable gloves and began his examination, his touch incredibly gentle yet efficient. He checked the cat's temperature, listened to its heart and lungs with a stethoscope, carefully opened its crusted eyes to check its pupils and the state of its mucous membranes, and examined its mouth. He probed the wounds gingerly. The cat remained terrifyingly passive throughout, barely reacting. Eleanor stood by, twisting her hands together, her coat clutched forgotten in one fist. She watched Dr. Ramirez's face, trying to read his expression. It was grim. After several minutes, he straightened up and turned to her, peeling off his gloves. Well, Eleanor, he began, his voice soft but serious. He's in profoundly bad shape, severely dehydrated, emaciated, probably hasn't eaten properly in a very long time. Hypothermic, too. Those sores are infected, some quite deeply, and based on the pattern and nature of some of these injuries, he paused, looking her directly in the eye. These aren't just from neglect or fights with other animals. Some of these look deliberate. This cat has been abused, Eleanor. Badly. The word hung in the air. Abused. It landed like a physical blow. Eleanor felt a cold fury rise within her, mingling with the overwhelming pity. She pictured someone intentionally hurting this defenseless creature, then dumping it like refuse. Her fists clenched unconsciously at her sides. He's also not a young cat, Dr. Ramirez continued gently. Judging by his teeth and general condition, discounting the current state, I'd put him somewhere in his late teens, maybe older, 15, 16 years at least, possibly more. An elderly cat, abused and abandoned, it was almost too much to bear. What are his chances, Doctor? Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. Dr. Ramirez sighed, rubbing his temples. Honestly, Eleanor, slim, very slim. He's critically ill. We can start him on IV fluids immediately for the dehydration, get some antibiotics into him for the infections, clean these wounds, give him nutritional support. But his system is severely compromised. There might be underlying organ damage from the starvation and neglect. Even with intensive care, he let the sentence hang, the implication clear. Eleanor looked down at the pathetic creature on the table, saw the almost imperceptible rise and fall of its rib cage. Slim chances, abuse, old age. Every logical part of her brain told her this was a lost cause, a recipe for heartbreak and expense she couldn't really afford. But logic had fled the moment she heard that first pitiful groan in the alley. She thought of its trembling, the coldness of its body against her hand, the sheer tenacity it must have possessed to survive this long. She couldn't give up on him now. She had pulled him from the garbage. She couldn't condemn him back to it, even metaphorically. She met Dr. Ramirez's gaze, her own surprisingly steady. "I understand, doctor, but I want to try. Please, do everything you can. I'll manage the cost somehow." A flicker of surprise, then warmth, crossed the vet's face. He nodded slowly. "All right, Eleanor, we'll give him the best shot we can. But be prepared, it's going to be a long road, and there are no guarantees." "I know," she whispered, looking back at the cat. "I know." She couldn't change his horrifying past, the cruelty he'd endured, the years of probable hardship. But standing there in the sterile quiet of the exam room, she made a silent vow. She would change his future, or at least she would try. He wouldn't die alone and unloved in the cold, not if she could help it. Dr. Ramirez and his technician, a young woman named Sarah, with capable hands and a soothing voice, immediately set to work. Eleanor watched for a few minutes as they gently shaved patches of matted fur to access veins for the IV fluids and to properly clean the worst of the sores. They moved with a quiet competence that was both reassuring and clinical. The sight of the cat's exposed skin, bruised and marked, was difficult to witness, but Eleanor forced herself to stay, feeling she owed him her presence. "We'll need to keep him here for at least a few days, Eleanor," Dr. Ramirez said, applying antiseptic to a particularly nasty wound on the cat's flank. "He needs round-the-clock fluid therapy and monitoring. We need to get his core temperature up, start him on strong antibiotics, and see if we can get any nutrition into him. Frankly, the next 48 hours are critical." Eleanor nodded, feeling numb. Leaving him here felt like another form of abandonment, even though she knew it was necessary. Can I visit?" "Of course," Dr. Ramirez assured her. "Call first, just to make sure we're not in the middle of a procedure, but yes, please do. Sometimes just knowing someone cares makes a difference, even for animals." Before leaving, Eleanor hesitantly approached the incubator where they had placed the cat after the initial treatment. He was hooked up to an IV drip, lying on a soft heated pad, looking impossibly small and lost. She reached a tentative finger through an opening and stroked the tiny patch of fur on his head that wasn't matted or shaved. It was surprisingly soft beneath the grime. "You need a name, little fighter," she murmured, her voice barely audible. Giving him a name felt like an act of faith, a claim laid against the overwhelming odds. She thought for a moment. He needed something strong, something that defied his current state. "Hope," she whispered. "I'm going to call you Hope." It felt right. It was what she was clinging to and what she wanted for him. Eleanor left the clinic feeling emotionally wrung out, her coat smelling faintly of antiseptic and despair. The drive home was a blur. Back in her quiet apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. She made tea she didn't drink and stared out the window as dusk settled over Maple Creek. She worried incessantly. Was Hope still breathing? Was he suffering? Had she done the right thing, taking on this burden, this likely heartbreak? The next few days passed in a haze of anxiety. Eleanor called the clinic twice a day, morning and evening. The reports were cautiously guarded. he made it through the night. His temperature is up slightly. He's still not showing much response, but he's holding steady. We managed to get a little high-calorie paste into him. Each small positive sign was grasped like a lifeline. Every non-committal phrase sent waves of worry crashing over her. She visited each afternoon. She would sit quietly beside Hope's incubator in the back treatment area, sometimes talking softly to him, telling him about her day, about the changing leaves outside, about the annoying squirrel that kept raiding her dormant flower pots. He remained largely unresponsive, his eyes usually closed, his breathing shallow. But Eleanor persisted, believing, or perhaps needing to believe, that her presence registered somewhere within his battered consciousness. Sarah, the technician, would often give her updates, showing her how they were cleaning his wounds, how the IV fluids were slowly rehydrating him. Sarah's quiet optimism was a comfort. "He's a tough old guy," she'd say with a small smile. "He's got spirit." After 3 long days, Dr. Ramirez called. "Eleanor," he said, his voice holding a note of cautious optimism she hadn't heard before, "Hope is showing some marginal improvement. His temperature is stable, his hydration is much better, and he actually licked a bit of food from my finger this morning. The antibiotics seem to be kicking in on the infections. It's still very touch and go, but I think we might be able to consider sending him home with you in a day or two, provided you feel up to the intensive nursing care he'll still require." Relief washed over Eleanor so intensely she had to sit down. "Oh, yes, doctor. Yes, absolutely. Whatever he needs. Just tell me what to do." 2 days later, Eleanor brought Hope home. He was still painfully thin and weak, his fur patchy where it had been shaved, the sores still needing daily cleaning and medication, but he was alive. Dr. Ramirez and Sarah had sent her home with a carrier lined with soft towels, bags of prescription high-calorie food, both wet paste and tiny kibble, syringes for administering liquid antibiotics, antiseptic wipes, medicated ointment, and a long list of instructions. Eleanor set up a recovery area in her spare bedroom, a room that had mostly gathered dust since Carol had moved out years ago. She laid down old towels and soft blankets in a low-sided box, creating a warm, comfortable nest. She placed shallow dishes of water and the special food nearby, along with a low-lipped litter box. The first few days at home were demanding. Hope spent most of his time curled in his nest, sleeping or simply lying still with his eyes closed. He showed little interest in his surroundings or in Eleanor. Feeding time was a challenge. He wouldn't eat on his own, so Eleanor had to patiently coax tiny amounts of the wet food paste onto her finger and gently offer it to him, sometimes needing to dab a little on his lips to prompt a lick. Cleaning his wounds required infinite gentleness. He would flinch sometimes, but never tried to bite or scratch, seemingly too weak, or perhaps instinctively understanding she was trying to help. Administering the liquid antibiotics via syringe into his mouth was another trial, but they managed. Eleanor established a routine around his care: wake up, check on Hope, offer food and water, clean wounds, administer medicine. Mid-morning check, offer food. Lunchtime check, offer food. Mid-afternoon check, offer food. Clean wounds, medicine. Evening check, offer food. Bedtime check, ensure he was warm and settled. Her own routines faded into the background, replaced by the constant quiet rhythm of caring for this fragile life. She talked to him constantly, just as she had at the clinic. Her voice was a low, soothing murmur in the quiet room. "There you go, Hope. Just a little more food. That's good. Let's get these sores cleaned up, poor fellow. It'll feel better soon. It's cold outside today, but you're nice and warm in here." She didn't expect a response, but the sound of her own voice filled the silence and, she hoped, provided some comfort to the traumatized cat. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. One morning, about a week after bringing him home, Eleanor entered the spare room to find Hope not in his box, but standing unsteadily beside his water dish, taking a tentative sip. He wobbled precariously, his back leg seeming particularly weak, but he was up. Eleanor froze, not wanting to startle him. He finished drinking, looked around vaguely, then slowly, carefully, made his way back to the safety of his nest. It was a small miracle. A few days later, while she was offering him food on her finger, he didn't just passively lick it off. He leaned forward slightly and gave a weak but definite nudge against her hand before taking the food. Later that same day, as she was gently cleaning a healing sore near his ear, she heard it, a faint, rusty rumble deep in his chest. A purr. It was weak, intermittent, but unmistakable. Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes. From then on, the improvements became more noticeable. Hope started eating small amounts from his dish on his own, though Eleanor still supplemented with hand feeding. He began exploring the spare room, moving slowly, but with increasing confidence. His shaved fur started to grow back in, soft and downy, revealing the classic orange tabby stripes beneath the lingering grime and patchiness. The sores healed, leaving behind pink scars. He started using the litter box reliably. He also began to show glimmers of personality. He would watch Eleanor with growing curiosity, his eyes now clear and a striking shade of amber, tracking her movements around the room. He started responding to her voice, sometimes with a soft, questioning meow, a sound so different from the initial groans of agony. It was still weak, raspy from disuse or perhaps damage, but it was communication. One afternoon, as Eleanor sat on the floor reading, Hope cautiously approached her. He sniffed her leg, then after a moment's hesitation, rubbed his head against her shin. It was a brief, tentative gesture, but it spoke volumes. Eleanor remained perfectly still, her heart swelling. He did it again, then, incredibly, took a clumsy step and half jumped, half climbed into her lap. He curled into a tight ball, the rusty purr starting up again, louder this time. Eleanor sat there for a long time, hardly daring to breathe, stroking his slowly recovering fur. The loneliness that had been her constant companion for years felt suddenly, miraculously, less present. This small, battered creature pulled from the edge of death was not just healing physically, he was healing something inside her, too. He was living up to his name. He was Hope, embodied in a skinny, scarred, purring bundle of orange fur. The long vigil was far from over, but now it felt truly, profoundly worthwhile. Weeks turned into a month, then two. The harshness of late autumn gave way to the deep chill of a Pennsylvania winter. Snow blanketed Maple Creek, muffling the sounds of the town and making Eleanor's small apartment feel even more like a sanctuary. Inside, life had found a new, warmer rhythm, centered around Hope's continued recovery. He was transformed. While still lean, the skeletal thinness was gone, replaced by developing muscle. His coat, though still bearing the marks of his ordeal with some thinner patches and scars, had grown in thick and surprisingly soft, a vibrant orange tabby blaze against the winter gloom. The sores were long healed, leaving faint silvery lines on his skin. He moved with more confidence now, exploring the entire apartment, though his favorite spot remained the armchair opposite Eleanor's, or, increasingly, Eleanor's lap itself. His personality, tentative at first, blossomed. He was a quiet cat, perhaps due to age or trauma, but deeply affectionate in his own way. He would greet Eleanor at the door with a soft, raspy meow and a hopeful look toward the kitchen. He followed her from room to room, a furry orange shadow. He developed little quirks, a fascination with the dripping faucet in the bathroom, a habit of making biscuits on the soft blue blanket Eleanor kept on the sofa, a particular fondness for watching the snow fall from the living room window. He still bore the physical legacies of his past, a slight limp in his back leg that Dr. Ramirez suspected was old arthritis aggravated by his ordeal, and the raspiness of his meow, which never quite cleared, but his amber eyes were bright and alert, full of trust and a quiet contentment that warmed Eleanor's heart every time she looked at him. She'd stopped thinking of him solely as Hope, the rescue case. He was simply her companion, a comforting presence in the quiet apartment. One chilly evening in early January, Eleanor was settled in her armchair, reading a novel, while Hope dozed on the ottoman nearby. The lamp cast a warm glow, glinting off the cat's fur. Eleanor paused in her reading, watching him sleep. He looked so peaceful, so different from the wretched creature she'd found shivering in that filthy box. She felt a surge of quiet pride and deep affection. As she watched, Hope shifted slightly in his sleep, turning his head. The lamplight caught his left ear at a particular angle. Eleanor's gaze lingered there. She'd noticed it before, of course, among the other nicks and scars that marked his body, but tonight, bathed in the soft light, it seemed specific. It wasn't just a ragged edge, it was a distinct V-shaped notch, cleanly defined near the tip of the ear. A flicker of something, familiarity, stirred deep in Eleanor's memory, distant and elusive. A V-shaped notch on a cat's ear. Why did that seem significant? She tried to grasp the fleeting thought, but it slipped away like waking from a dream. She shook her head slightly, attributing it to a trick of the light or her imagination. He was an old stray, likely scarred from countless fights or accidents. It was just another mark. But the image stuck with her. Over the next few days, she found herself looking closely at Hope's left ear whenever he was near. The V-shape was undeniably there, clean and precise, unlike the more ragged tears on his other ear. It looked less like a battle scar and more like something else. The feeling of vague familiarity persisted, nagging at the edges of her consciousness. It felt connected to something long ago, something from her childhood. She pictured her family's old farmhouse, the sprawling fields, the creek that ran behind the barn. Then, one afternoon, while Hope was curled on her lap, purring contentedly as she stroked him, she gently traced the outline of the notch with her finger. He didn't flinch, and suddenly the memory surfaced, sharp and clear, like a photograph developing in her mind. She was a girl, maybe 10 years old. Her cat, a boisterous orange tabby kitten named Rusty, had followed her down to the creek. She'd been trying to navigate the rickety old barbed wire fence that separated their property from the neighbor's woods. Rusty, always adventurous, always underfoot, had tried to dart through a gap just as she climbed over. His ear snagged on a sharp barb. He'd let out a yowl of surprise and pain, pulling back quickly. It bled for a bit, and her mother had helped her clean it. When it healed, it left a perfect, tiny V-shaped notch right at the tip of his left ear. She remembered feeling guilty, but also secretly thinking it made him look distinguished, like a little pirate. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her hand froze on Hope's fur. Rusty? Could it be? No. It was impossible. Utterly, absurdly impossible. Rusty would be... She did the math quickly in her head. She was 10 then. She was 72 now. That would make Rusty 62 years old? No, that couldn't be right. Cats didn't live that long. She must have misremembered the timing or the cat, but the memory felt so vivid. The farmhouse, the creek, the barbed wire, the tiny V-notch on Rusty's left ear. Her heart began to pound. She looked down at the sleeping cat in her lap, the orange tabby fur, the amber eyes, just like Rusty's, the quiet affection. She gently lifted his ear again, examining the notch closely. It was exactly as she remembered it. Could the vet have been wrong about his age? Dr. Ramirez had estimated based on teeth and general condition, heavily influenced by the severe neglect. Could extreme hardship make a cat appear much older than it was? Even so, 62 was out of the question. Wait, when did Rusty disappear? It wasn't when she was 10. It was later, much later. She concentrated, pushing past the fog of decades. It was after the family incident, as she always vaguely termed it in her mind. She hadn't been a child. She'd been a young woman, just starting out. The memories came flooding back, clearer now, tinged with old pain. She was 22, living in a small apartment in her hometown, working her first real job. Frank was still just her boyfriend then. Rusty, her childhood companion, had come to live with her after her parents had downsized. He was about 12 years old at the time, a mature, settled cat, still bearing his distinctive ear notch. Then came the devastating news. The factory where her father and Frank both worked was closing, effective immediately. Opportunities in their small town evaporated overnight. Frank found a promising lead for a job, but it was halfway across the country in Oregon. They had to move, quickly and cheaply. Taking a cat on such a sudden cross-country relocation with barely enough money for gas and lodging seemed impossible at that frantic moment. Her parents couldn't take him back. A neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind elderly woman who adored Rusty, promised faithfully to care for him until Eleanor could arrange to send for him or come back. They left in a rush of packing boxes and tearful goodbyes. Eleanor remembered crying as she said goodbye to Rusty, burying her face in his familiar orange fur, promising she'd be back for him. Weeks turned into months. Settling in Oregon was harder and more expensive than they'd anticipated. When Eleanor finally scraped together the money and called Mrs. Gable to arrange Rusty's transport, the line was disconnected. Panicked, she called another old neighbor only to learn that Mrs. Gable had suffered a severe stroke shortly after Eleanor left and had been moved to a nursing home hours away. No one knew what had happened to the orange cat she'd been looking after. He had simply vanished. Eleanor had been heartbroken, consumed by guilt for years. She'd searched, made calls, but found no trace. She assumed Rusty, already an older cat, accustomed to a home, hadn't survived long on his own or had met a sad end. She had mourned him and eventually accepted his loss as one of the painful costs of that abrupt life change. Now, sitting in her Maple Creek apartment 50 years later, she stared at the orange cat in her lap. If Rusty was 12 when she left, and that was 50 years ago, he wouldn't be 62. He would be 62. Still impossible. Her mind raced, searching for a logical explanation. Could the vet have been that far off on the age? Could a cat possibly live into its 20s? Yes, sometimes. Rarely, but possibly. But 62? No. Unless her memory of Rusty's age then was wrong. Was he younger than 12 when she left? Maybe only 8 or 6? If he was only, say, 6 years old when she left him 50 years ago, he'd be 56 now. Still impossible. Wait. Think clearly, Eleanor. How old were you when you left? Was it really 50 years ago? Frank died 10 years ago. They'd been married 42 years. They got married a year after moving to Oregon. So they moved 43 years ago. Not 50. 43 years ago. She was 22. Rusty was her childhood cat. If she got him when she was 10, he would have been 12 years old when she left at 22. 12 plus 43 years. That made him 55. Still impossible. Could she have gotten Rusty later? Maybe she wasn't 10. Maybe she was 15. Then he would have been 7 when she left. 7 plus 43, 50. Impossible. There had to be a mistake, a coincidence. A remarkably similar-looking orange tabby with an identical, distinctively shaped notch on his left ear, found near death decades later, miles away from where he was lost. It defied all logic. Yet, the feeling was overwhelming. The specific notch, the amber eyes, the way he nudged her hand, just so. Trembling slightly, Eleanor carefully eased Hope off her lap. She went to the hall closet, pulling down a dusty cardboard box marked Photos and Keepsakes. She hadn't opened it in years. Sitting on the floor, she lifted the lid. The scent of old paper and faded memories filled the air. She sifted through packets of photographs. Frank and her on their wedding day, Carol as a baby, holidays, birthdays, a visual tapestry of a life lived. Deep near the bottom was an older, thicker envelope simply labeled Misk Early. Her fingers fumbled slightly as she pulled out the photos within. Pictures of her parents, younger and smiling, her old farmhouse, and there, several photos of a much younger Eleanor with a vibrant, slightly plump orange tabby cat. Her breath caught in her throat. There he was, Rusty, lounging on a porch railing, pouncing on a string she dangled, curled on her lap as she read a book, looking remarkably similar to the cat currently watching her from the armchair. She scanned the photos eagerly. In a close-up shot, where Rusty was looking directly at the camera, his left ear was clearly visible. And there it was, plain as day, the small, neat, V-shaped notch near the tip. Identical. Eleanor stared at the photograph, then looked over at Hope, who blinked slowly at her from the armchair. The resemblance, even accounting for age and extreme hardship, was uncanny. The markings, the shape of his head, the color of his eyes, and that notch. It was him. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes and began to stream down her cheeks. It wasn't logical. It defied explanation. 43 years. How could he possibly have survived? How could he have ended up here, in Maple Creek, Pennsylvania, hundreds of miles from where he was lost in western Pennsylvania, and how, by the slimmest, most improbable chance in the universe, did she happen to walk down that specific alley on that specific day and hear his faint groan? It didn't make sense. But looking at the photo, then at the living, breathing cat who had fought his way back from the brink, Eleanor knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that it was true. This scarred, elderly survivor, this creature she had rescued from the garbage and nursed back to health, this cat she had named Hope, was Rusty. Her Rusty. Come back to her after nearly half a century. The sheer, staggering improbability of it, the impossible reunion across decades of silence and presumed loss, overwhelmed her. She wasn't just crying from shock or disbelief. She was crying from a profound, unexpected joy, a sense of fate, and the resurfacing of a love she thought was lost forever. Hope, indeed. Fate had given him and her the most astonishing second chance. The revelation settled over Eleanor's apartment, not with a crash, but with a quiet, profound sense of wonder that reshaped the atmosphere. Looking at the cat, at Rusty, was different now. Every glance held a double exposure. The frail, scarred survivor recovering in her armchair, overlaid with the ghost of a vibrant young cat chasing butterflies in a sun-drenched field decades ago. The V-shaped notch on his ear was no longer just a scar. It was a tangible link, a tiny anchor connecting two vastly different points in time. The absurdity of his age remained a puzzle. 55? It still seemed impossible for a cat, especially one who had clearly endured immense hardship. Eleanor found herself scrutinizing him, searching for clues. Perhaps her memory of his age when she got him was faulty. Maybe he was younger than she recalled when he first came into her life. Or perhaps Dr. Ramirez's initial assessment, clouded by the cat's near-death state, was significantly off. Maybe Rusty wasn't 55, but a still ancient 25? Even that felt like stretching biological bounds. She considered calling Dr. Ramirez, sharing her incredible story, asking him to reevaluate Rusty's age now that he was healthier. But she hesitated. What would she say? "Doctor, I know you said he was maybe 18, but I think he's actually my childhood cat who would be 55 years old now." It sounded ludicrous, even to her. She could picture the kindly vet's gentle skepticism, the awkward silence. What did the exact number matter anyway? The connection felt real, undeniable, cemented by that unique mark and the flood of recognition it had unlocked. Whether he was an impossibly old cat or merely an ancient one who happened to be her long-lost companion, the miracle was the same. He was here. He was Rusty. She started calling him Rusty, softly at first, interspersed with hope. "Come on, Rusty, time for dinner." "What do you see out the window, Hopi boy?" The cat seemed to respond to both names equally, perhaps sensing the affection in her tone more than the specific words. But increasingly, in her heart and in her quiet conversations with him, he was Rusty. Life settled into a new kind of normal. Rusty, seemingly sensing the shift in her perception, or perhaps simply growing more secure in his new life, became even more affectionate. He would seek out her lap more often, purring his rusty purr, kneading the blanket with quiet concentration. He still had his limitations. The slight limp remained, and he tired easily, spending long hours dozing in sunbeams or curled in his favorite chair. But his moments of wakefulness were filled with a quiet presence that Eleanor cherished. She found herself talking to him more than ever, not just the soothing stream of consciousness chatter of his recovery, but real reminiscing. "Do you remember the barn swallows, Rusty?" she murmured one afternoon, stroking his soft fur. "How you used to sit on the fence post and watch them for hours. You never tried to catch them, just watched." She told him about the old farmhouse, about her parents, about Frank when he was young and courting her. She recounted the painful story of their sudden move, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry I had to leave you, boy. I was young and scared, and I didn't know what else to do. I never stopped feeling guilty. I thought you were gone forever." Rusty would listen, or seem to, blinking slowly, occasionally giving a soft, raspy meow as if in response. Of course, he couldn't understand her words, but Eleanor felt a sense of unburdening nonetheless. Sharing these memories with him, bridging the vast gulf of years, felt like a necessary part of their reunion. The question of how he had survived and how he ended up in Maple Creek remained an enigma. 43 years is an eternity in the life of a cat. Had someone taken him in after Mrs. Gable fell ill? Had he lived other lives, had other names, other homes, before falling on hard times? How many miles had he traveled? Had he been brought to this area recently, only to be abandoned again? Or had he somehow inexplicably been wandering for decades? The possibilities were endless, unknowable. His scarred body and weary eyes held stories Eleanor could only guess at, a silent testament to resilience against unimaginable odds. She would never know the details of his long journey, the hardships faced, the kindnesses perhaps encountered along the way. All that mattered was the final improbable destination. Her doorstep, her care, her love. News of Eleanor's rescued cat spread mildly through her small social circle. Martha, the vet receptionist, always asked after Hope with genuine interest. Her neighbor down the hall, Mrs. Gable, a different Mrs. Gable, ironically, sometimes stopped by and marveled at his transformation. "He looks like a different cat entirely, Eleanor. You've worked wonders." Eleanor simply smiled and said he was a fighter. She never shared the full, incredible story of Rusty's identity. It felt too personal, too precious, perhaps too unbelievable to explain. It was her secret miracle. Winter slowly began to loosen its grip on Maple Creek. Patches of grass appeared from beneath the melting snow, and the first brave crocuses pushed through the cold earth. With the returning light, Eleanor felt a lightness within herself she hadn't experienced in years. The quiet ache of loneliness had receded, replaced by a sense of purpose and companionship. Caring for Rusty, rediscovering this living piece of her past, had filled a void she hadn't fully acknowledged was there. Her weekly calls with Carol took on a new warmth. Eleanor spoke enthusiastically about her cat, his recovery, his funny habits. Carol, pleased to hear the happiness in her mother's voice, listened patiently, picturing a generic rescue cat, never guessing the impossible truth. One sunny afternoon in early spring, Eleanor sat on her small balcony, Rusty snoozing peacefully on a chair beside her. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of damp earth and new beginnings. She looked at the old cat, his orange fur gleaming in the sun, his breathing slow and steady. The journey had been improbable, the odds insurmountable, the reunion illogical. Yet here they were, two survivors, each bearing the scars of their past, finding solace and companionship in the quiet twilight of their lives. She didn't know how much time they would have together. Rusty was undeniably old, his past hardships likely to take their toll eventually, but she didn't dwell